After you discover yourself to be in a new and a great and a wonderful world, you'll start noticing these things. And then dormant forces, faculties and talents come alive. Dormant forces. Dormant forces are forces that you thought were inaccessible, that were dead, that were not available to you. These things that my teacher, Carl Jung, who I mentioned earlier, called synchronicities or serendipities, that you're having a thought, and because of the thought that you are having, it manifests right there for you. You start noticing it, and you don't doubt it. You become a being of sharing. You become someone who acts as God acts, which is someone who is constantly giving, who is forgiving. I received a letter in the mail that illustrates this phenomenon of dormant forces coming alive. The letter was from a woman who at that time was living in Topeka, Kansas. She said, "Dear Wayne, thank you so much for your presentations and your tapes. You are frequently my traveling companion as I drive in my job. I just wanted to add my testimony to the power of meditation and intention. I was an on and off meditator, but realized how much more smoothly my days went when I was on it. I visited Kenya, Africa, in June of 2002 and met an 8-year-old orphan girl there. As I sat on the ground, she crawled into my lap and a voice said, 'Take her home.' A dormant force. Take her home." She actually heard this voice. I physically turned around, but no one was there. Again the voice said, "Take her home." I asked my 18-year-old daughter, who was with me on the trip, what she thought about my adopting this beautiful girl. And with the quickness of a sprinter, she replied, "Go for it." When we returned to the States a week later, I realized that if I didn't follow through with this adoption, I'd always regret it. Regret seemed much larger than the task of adopting. I began doing the meditation each morning, and through a series of miracles, the child was able to come to this country accompanied by a newly made friend. I named her Nellie, and she has been a blessing to me and my other children. Nellie's adoption was part 2 of God's plan. Part 1 had unfolded a couple of years before, and I felt guided to sponsor a series of workshops for which I profited $10,000 with very little time or work. And guess what the final cost of adopting Nellie was? The first time I heard the voice, I chose to disregard it and or think it through, making lists of pros and cons. But I couldn't rest until I proceeded with the workshop. That's how I explained to my family that I needed to proceed with adopting Nellie. Obedience had brought abundance into our lives, and now it was time to share that abundance. Nellie has brought the abundance of love and forgiveness into our home. She is truly a treasure. Thank you for sharing your gift of this wonderful meditation. It changed my life and the life of a little girl. What a beautiful letter. I invited Gail to come here and Nellie, and I would like them to stand and be recognized right now. Gail and Nellie. Come on up here, sweetheart. Thank you. Thank you. That's so beautiful. Thank you. Inspiration. Gail and Nellie, you inspire me. You listened to your dream, and you didn't go with the cons. You went with the pros and made it happen. And we are honored to have both of you here. You're the beautiful people that this world needs more of. One of the things I believe about nobility, about true nobility, is that true nobility is not about being better than anyone else. It's about being better than you used to be. And I think your letter illustrates that when you move into spirit, dormant forces come alive, and you're just better than you used to be. And so are you, Ryan, and so are you, Immaculate, and so are all of us who listen and take that step to move into spirit. There's a man on this planet whom I've loved for many, many years. His name is Ram Dass. Many of you have heard of him. He wrote a book back in the late 1960s called Be Here Now. It was the beginning. Ram Dass taught me so much about what kind of speaker to be, what kind of human being to be. His teacher, Neem Karoli Baba in India, after he left Harvard and went to India, he was a Harvard professor, and he left all of that behind, and he met this great teacher who told him, serve God, feed people. And so he donated all of the proceeds of his book, Be Here Now, to various charities. Very seldom took a speaking fee, had it all donated to charities. 1997, my friend Ram Dass, as you see there, was struck down with a stroke. And I have been working hard to help him to rehabilitate himself. And it's been one of my great joys. And you'll know in a moment why I love this man so much. And I've worked so hard to bring the attention of the world to where he is now. He ended up with nothing because he gave it all away. And I came into his life in a series of, quote, fortuitous accidents that have allowed me to be of service to him. And a few years back, he has many devotees, many people who just respect him so immensely, and I'm one of them. I think of him as one of the greatest speakers I've ever heard. He always entered a room from the back. He was always open. He always had a great sense of humor, was able to poke fun at himself at any time, and just great stories of India and meditation and so on. Someone I love very much. And I want to show you what kind of a person he was, and I'm including this because it's about finding inspiration in anything. Like Immaculate's story tells about finding inspiration in the midst of a genocide. Most of us won't have to encounter such an undertaking in our lives. But there are still many horrors and many difficulties and many struggles that show up in our life. And when we're in spirit, we move away from a sense of feeling sorry for ourselves and instead look for what the lesson is. Steve and Anita had a daughter named Rachel. Rachel was brutally murdered, and her body was left. And they wrote to Ram Dass, who was their teacher, and they said, how can we, after losing our daughter, how can we find spirit? How can we be inspired? How can we find God in events such as this? And there are many of you watching who have encountered these kinds of acts and have also encountered accidents and things that just don't seem to make sense. People just taken away from us at what are seemingly the wrong times. And this is what Ram Dass wrote to Steve and Anita. It's one of the most beautiful letters I've ever read. He said, Dear Steve and Anita, Rachel finished her work on earth and left the stage in a manner that leaves those of us left behind with a cry of agony in our hearts as the fragile thread of our faith is dealt with so violently. Is anyone strong enough to stay conscious through such teachings as you are receiving? Probably very few. And even they would only have a whisper of equanimity and peace amidst the screaming trumpets of their rage, grief, horror, and desolation. I can't assuage your pain with any words, nor should I. For your pain is Rachel's legacy to you. Not that she or I would inflict such pain by choice, but there it is, and it must burn its purifying way to completion. For something in you dies when you bear the unbearable. And it is only in that dark night of the soul that you are prepared to see as God sees, and to love as God loves. Now is the time to let your grief find expression, no false strength. Now is the time to sit quietly and speak to Rachel, and thank her for being with you these few years, and encourage her to go on with whatever her work is, knowing that you will grow in compassion and wisdom from this experience. In my heart I know that you and she will meet again and again and recognize the many ways in which you have known each other. And when you meet, you will know in a flash what now it is not given to you to know, why this had to be the way it was. Our rational minds can never understand what has happened, but our hearts, if we keep them open to God, will find their own intuitive way. Rachel came through you to do her work on earth, which includes her manner of death. Now, her soul is free, and the love that you can share with her is invulnerable to the winds of changing time and space. In that deep love, include me. In love, Ram Dass. I just don't think writing gets any better than that. And for those of you who can't figure it out, perhaps just listening to those words and being able to find inspiration even in the most horrifying of times. When you're in spirit, you have a different kind of a knowing, one that doesn't require you to continue to suffer. And finally, number 6, the rewards for being in spirit. You discover yourself to be a greater person by far than you ever dreamed that you could be. You practice radical humility. People who have inspired me in my life include Rosa Parks, passed away not too long ago, Nelson Mandela, President Kennedy in the midst of the Cuban Missile Crisis when he went within and found a way by connecting to his private source to avoid a nuclear confrontation. Martin Luther King Jr.'s teachings about the only way to convert an enemy to a friend is through love. There's no other way. But you know, I would be remiss in a program on inspiration if I didn't include the person, perhaps the one person, who has been my greatest source of inspiration. I was born in 1940, the youngest of 3. My father walked out. In fact, when my mother brought me home from the hospital, she told me that my father had moved in with another woman and left my oldest brother, who was 4, and my next oldest brother, Dave, Jim and Dave, who was 2, less than 2, in the care of a 4-year-old. He was someone who paid no support, who wandered, who was frequently with other women, and so on. He was an alcoholic, and visited a lot of difficulty. There was no time in those days for welfare and so on. There was a depression. My brother was anemic. My mother was working for a while as a candy girl, earning $17 a week, and she put my brother Dave and myself into a series of foster homes sponsored by the Methodist Church because there just simply was no other way. But her nightmare was very, very real. Her family had been split, but she held a vision of reuniting her family one day. She visited when it was possible, but we were 17 miles away in Mount Clemens, and it might as well have been 17,000 miles because she didn't drive, had no automobile or any way to get out there hardly. Did what she could, but she could get a ride.